All right, so hi, welcome to my talk. I'm Eliza. I'm an artist and a programmer, as well as a researcher and an educator. And some of my past lives include a brief but illuminating stint in advertising, as well as a fascinating period I spent working as a journalist. I was there on the cusp of social media, so it was definitely interesting to witness the shift in how things were done in a newsroom. Um, and I worked for quite a while in video too. I wore many hats in that industry, content creation, but definitely I enjoyed editing the most. And I mention these past lives because there's an interesting common thread that kind of weaves itself through there. And that's that each of these industries and the positions that I occupied kind of rely on people's emotional response, people's senses being triggered in some way. And while I'm not so into the commoditization of that, I have always been pretty interested in these topics of emotional response and why and how people feel and all that. And my time working as a brand strategist and as a journalist certainly allowed space for me to explore that, as did the time I spent editing videos. Each of these areas kind of represents their own opportunity to observe and inquire about what makes people respond. But it wasn't until I really got my hands dirty with code and CG, computer graphics in particular, that I was able to find the ideal conduit for me to explore sensory response, emotional triggers, in a way that felt right and integral for me. My work is very focused on experimentation, and that's as true for me as it is for others. Like, I want to experiment, make cool things, learn new things, and hopefully anyone who encounters my work, gets drawn in, feels that pull to play around and work out what's in front of them, and how they feel called to interact with it. So that's kind of the overarching theme for me. As someone who is a self-taught programmer for the most part, definitely when it comes to CG, I've learned to really appreciate the science of math and all the funky things that we can do thanks to numbers. And any past math teacher of mine would probably spit their coffee out hearing me say that, but yeah, and I can go in so many different directions with this, but in particular right now, what I'm talking about is shaders, which are definitely up there for me when it comes to things I'm excited about and kind of forever obsessed with. Shaders make things look pretty, or I should say shaders make things look however you want them to look. And that's important because in my case, I want people to want to touch the 3D creations that I make. And so I use shaders to support that, but that's a lot of math. And, on the topic of math, it's just so crazy to me to think that I can use like the rhythm of a sine wave to create patterns on a screen. So yeah. And just a quick shout out, because she's in the GIF with me, to Alethea, the lovely, lovely friend of mine with whom I often code shaders. Yeah, we get together and kind of record snippets of ourselves coding shaders, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm equally a big fan of collaboration and pair programming. Some other things that I enjoy using code for include sound. I use this tool called Orca, which was created by 100 Rabbits, and I love it because there's just very sparse kind of documentation. It kind of forces you to just play around and explore, which are two guiding principles in my work, I guess. It's probably become pretty clear at this point. But yeah, because we're not here for rules, at least I'm not, and not all play needs rules, right? And again, here, the same math that kind of governs shader coding also governs the frequencies that I use, in my sound exploration. So it all comes back to the sine wave, which just, it's the overlap, that common language to express something that's so vastly different, like colorful pixels dancing around on a screen and an actual sound that you hear reverberating in your head. Yeah, but these are just some of the interests, I think, of mine that complement and support the larger core of what I do, which is using real-time and mostly 3D graphics to explore interactivity and sensory response in the overlap between the digital and the physical world. So let's talk about the overlap for a second. I spend a lot of time playing around with merging the digital with the real. I'm really interested in kind of hijacking, or I guess repurposing, the tools that I use, that being code and the computer and, otherwise binary digital tools, to create things that kind of encourage a broadening of our conception of what here versus there might mean, as well as, what actually generates sensation in our bodies. We're so used to thinking of sensation through the conduit of physical touch, but things are not always so explicit. I'm very, very curious about how technology can be used to get us back in touch with ourselves, our bodies, our present kind of state. So often we hear about all the ways that technology disconnects us from each other and from ourselves. And so I became interested over the years in exploring the ways in which it might also be used to kind of do the opposite. In particular, I'm really into textures and playing around with the look and feel of things. So again, shaders come in handy here. But, making something that simultaneously generates both a feeling of like familiarity, but also alien, like it feels alien enough that we're provoked in some way. And so the idea is to confront those two feelings, those two sensations. And there's a certain charm to, I think, to creating something that evokes the natural world, even if it's just like really subtly, but doing that with such a clunky tool as like code and a computer, But yeah, this seems to be the key I've discovered, or at least one of them. So this is one of my earlier pieces. It's a jiggly eye. And it got a really great response when I first showed it. People didn't quite know what to make of it. Were not sure how they felt about it. And so, back to what I was saying, like I found a key, but the key to what? Well, to jarring people, essentially. Just enough that their head kind of like cocks to the side a bit and maybe their senses tingle, in such a way that they find themselves called back to presence, even if it's just for like 1 second. It's that second that destabilizes the psyche and kind of tickles our intuition and makes us want to, reach out and touch what we see. And yeah, so the digital hands in these images are projections of my own hands being tracked in real time by a sensor. You'll also probably have noticed a bit of a bubble theme throughout my work. I really like soft, squishy things. Touchability, if that's a word, is really important to me. There's also this quality to bubbles that seems to kind of induce immediate wonder in people. I remember being in California at Golden Gate Park last year, and there was this man who had set up shop on the grass making these huge, massive bubbles, and I mean like body size bubbles, like adult body size bubbles, and kids would come running up to them and try to catch them, and adults did too. And you just had all these people, young and old, kind of like running around on the grass with their hands in the air, trying to catch those bubbles, and everyone was laughing. It was such a moment of pure happiness. It was like just really cute and nice to see. And so bubbles, I mean, they kind of have this really irresistible pull to them. So yeah, that's the hope, basically. The hope is that people are enticed into reaching out and reaching into, or feeling drawn in, in a way. And maybe it's that feeling that they can't quite describe. Like they don't really know what it is that they're feeling, but they know that they're feeling something. I got that a lot with this demo too. This is to furry bubbles, and the different textures of fur, of hair, really threw people off. So I'd say that so far, I'm not, totally failing in my endeavor. I've gotten a lot of fun feedback from people that my work made them feel weird, which to me is the highest compliment. And I've also gotten that same kind of feedback from people who have seen but not directly experienced having their hands projected into the parallel world, which is so great. I mean, to me, it means that I've really kind of accessed that ASMR space. And yeah, having a physics engine to mess around with definitely helps with that, because you can, take the rules of the natural world and just kind of mess with them, But on the topic of touch, some people actually don't, like being touched, and still want that proximity, that closeness to others. This is a project that I've been working on with two other artists, Ines Alpha and Marpy, who are two really awesome and mega talented humans. The project is called Supermorphia, and it basically kind of indirectly ponders this question in the most colorful way possible. We wanted to combine all of our aesthetics, maintain that same kind of, eerie but familiar vibe that shows up in Marpy's work as it does in mine, and create some unique 3D makeup, which is Ines's specialty. Her aesthetic is also pretty out of this world, like in the best way. So it was just a lot of fun to work on this all together. And we ended up designing something that basically allows us to draw the makeup right onto our faces, as well as on each other's faces without ever touching them. So that physical boundary is maintained. And yeah, this is a bit of a departure from the face filters that social media has made us all so familiar with, I think, at this point, because here we're really selecting and applying the makeup kind of like however and wherever we want on our face. So yeah, here we're basically presented with this idea of sensation elicited from kind of implicit instead of explicit interaction. And here I'm talking about interaction, of course, between two physical bodies, because, of course, we're interacting with a computer. But there's also just this perception of how a certain type of makeup feels versus another when experienced through the screen, but also on my face. Like in our case, we chose 3 types of makeup. Let me go back the previous slide because I think it's clearer. Yeah. We chose 3 types of makeup, each with their own kind of vibe, like stiff diamonds, jiggly bubbles, because of course, and sinuous kind of flowery vines. And yeah, there's something just really special about applying it yourself. And yeah, it's been a really wild ride trying to get all of this to render in real time properly, but it's been really fun and we all learned a lot. And so yeah, digital playgrounds, there are no rules and you get to work out what the experience is for yourself. And if you spend enough time playing with the makeup, you might, let me show you that video again, you might discover that you can connect to the other person with your makeup. And so, you're touching each other without touching, which elicits, its own host of sensations, and everyone is different. So the sensations are super personal and individual. Like here, you're going to see Ines and I connect to each other via the same kind of little tendril there, and then we can pull it apart, and it wants to touch. So yeah, that was a fun little detail we discovered. So yeah, another idea that's pretty front of mind for me these days is kind of just that notion of being in 2 places at once. Because you've got a kind of portal situation happening with this kind of technology, right? Where you're transposing yourself, or part of yourself at least, in real time into digital spaces that are kind of parallel to ours, worlds just beyond. So to me, XR as a concept really allows for that to exist and be explored. To be able to be where I am here now, but also be in that somewhere, in that scene, touching something, which creates a sensation that I can feel in my body here now, right? Like that's what I'm talking about. Let me show you a clip from a show that I did in San Francisco last year. There we go. One of my favorite things to witness when I get, to see people play with my work is how quickly they kind of get wrapped up in the moment and forget that they're in a public space and that there are other people around. So it's nice to see that kind of like letting go. And you see it a lot in interactive pieces that play on mirroring movement back to you in a slightly off-kilter way. Adults kind of turn into kids again, and it's just so great. Like for a moment, they access this really inquisitive, kind of intuitive space of wonder. So here's a little montage of people's hands from the show that you just saw a video of, to showcase the many approaches people have when confronted by something like, the furry bubbles you just saw. I get a kick out of this slide because it's always super fun to see how people engage with your work. And also, it just kind of drives home the point that everyone approaches things so differently and plays differently, and that's totally fine. And in fact, that's kind of the point. So, to feel out how you want to approach something foreign that appears alien, but also inviting. And there's just something about doing this outside of the confines of a headset that to me really adds to the experience. I truly appreciate sensors and computer vision technology for that, because here what's capturing people's hand movements is a leap motion sensor, which you can't really see, but I love using the sensor with projected artworks because suddenly there's this, like I said, there's this window into another world, and you can interact with that world, and not like as a shadow figure and an invisible force, but part of your body is in there. But it doesn't quite move the same, and so it might solicit some surprising feelings from you again. Like that's the goal, right? And yeah, I have a really great clip. I'd like to share an extended clip from the same show of one of the attendees kind of experiencing all of the feels. Like she goes through the gamut, and I think it just really illustrates what I'm trying to say properly. So yeah, she comes up, she's not sure, she's curious but confused, reticent a little bit, but still like intrigued. And then she kind of lets go. I just love all of her facial expressions. It's great. Yeah. So I've had the immense chance to play around with some of the looking glass technology as well, which gets me really excited because I was raised on Star Trek. So anyone who says hologram to me gets my attention pretty fast. And so this is me playing around with their 8K screens, which are pretty impressive, to say the least. And again, here using the leap motion to kind of reach into a parallel space and influence whatever I might find in there. Here it's kind of looking into a void, but we have a riff on my hairy bubbles. I made them extra thick for the occasion. It was a lot of fun, and it was as I was starting to play around with looking glass that I really started kind of toying with this notion that I kind of demo with this example. The idea of breaking the fourth wall. It kind of started creeping into my work slowly, just this idea that the camera lens in the 3D scene might also be like a window, right, in both directions, because why not? Like, why is it just us looking in? Isn't that how portals usually work anyways? Like, they go in both directions. So yeah, I just like the idea of that world also kind of being able to at least feel the border between our two worlds. So yeah, maybe it isn't just about us kind of reaching in only, but also of them kind of understanding that there's a reaching happening and that there might be something beyond that wall. This is kind of a smaller looking glass device, and yeah, here I'm just kind of, like I said, inserting my hands into this whole other space that contains these like bubbles that can't escape. And it's a simple enough idea, but it kind of planted a third question in my mind. What if we kind of flipped everything that I've been saying on its head, and instead of giant hands descending into a parallel world, giant bubbles kind of emerged from a parallel world and came and arrived and landed in ours. So in the case of EP7, which is a building structure here in Paris, in a part of Paris that doesn't really look very much like Paris, I adapted one of my projects where normally, like you saw, you'd be able to kind of reach in and touch the bubbles with your hands. And actually, just for fun, I'll show you a clip from Burning Man from last year where I was able to put my hands up on a huge surface, and it really worked out with the play on scale. It was pretty fun. So yeah, we basically set up a leap motion sensor on a tiki torch, and I found some really long cables and got everything working. And it was just a really special place to show art, and especially being that I chose to put the eyeball up on the pyramid and the nature of the gathering. Yeah, it made for some really funny conversations. I got a lot of hugs that night. But yeah, given the nature of the screens for the exhibit at Epicet, I opted to kind of swap out human hands and use the building as the interactive element instead of humans. It felt like the perfect place to kind of try out that idea, right, of the other world arriving in ours and kind of implanting in ours. The facade was made up of screens that were organized in a pretty exceptional way, at least in my experience. So I found it really fun as an idea to kind of, allow the building to take center stage. I saw it almost as kind of like a labyrinth, where bubbles could kind of wander and bounce around and sneak past corners and come up against the street side of the screen as well. Or kind of, I guess, what appears to be like a window between our two worlds. And just kind of experiencing it from that vantage point. I just like the idea of it not being one-sided, I guess. And there's also, I guess, this theme of bouncing off the walls that just became ever present over the last year in my work. And at one point, over the last couple of months, or I guess over the last year, I got kind of overwhelmed with everything that was happening around me, right, in the world. And it seemed like life had kind of turned into this weird, bad blockbuster. I don't know really what genre properly fits to describe the year that is currently winding down, but I was in it and feeling like, I don't know, I just wanted to get out, but there's no exit. So I guess I kind of translated that into my work a little too. It wasn't super conscious at the time at all. But this facade, my work was shown just after the government in France kind of started to allow spaces to open up again this summer. So it felt very appropriate to show this work there. And I just found that the facade would really kind of highlight this all beautifully, like the fishbowl kind of feeling that I had experienced at certain points of the last year, but also, that of being out in the world again and of kind of like a foreign kind of alien entity arriving and kind of implanting in ours. It felt like, kind of the perfect spot to try it out. And so anyways, that's a bit of a tangent, but I really like the idea of art as architecture, perspective and depth, and those kinds of mind-bending opportunities kind of set the stage perfectly for that portal feeling. And I was talking about that before. I guess here, this would be an example of when a portal was one-sided, but sometimes they're one-sided. I guess that's like an artist's choice, right? But at Burning Man, you could definitely see that it works. You can definitely throw your hands up and have them be 8 times as big as your body, and that be an amazing experience. Scale is a really fun parameter to play with when it comes to eliciting weird feelings in people. So using technology to kind of trigger our own awareness of our senses, depth perception of space, scale. I almost honestly like to think of it as kind of like tearing a hole in reality, and kind of getting a peek at what's beyond the veil or the facade, literally, right? And also kind of just from an imaginative space, there's so much we can do with that, especially these days. Everything feels so unreal, so surreal. Whatever your brand of real is at the moment, there are all kinds of conversations floating around about, I don't know, how we're living a simulation or whatever. And again, however you might approach that flavor of thinking, I find it just kind of interesting to play with these concepts in a more tangible but fantastical kind of way, I guess. Make it fun, make it colorful, approach things playfully, highlight the ways that we can use technology in more playful ways that connect us to ourselves, because we get to decide how we use it and what we make with it. and working with 3D and XR and like all the gadgets and devices in that way, like rethinking how we can kind of be in this overlap and how we can move within it. To me, it's a very free and open kind of space, or at least like it can be. It's really up to us, like how we choose to use the technology at our disposal, and what we choose to kind of explore with it. So yeah, for me, I choose, more of a playful, intuitive kind of space, and just, opting to push back a bit, I guess, against all the ways that we use technology against ourselves, consciously or not, and just kind of choosing to flip the script in my own little way and putting technology at the service of our senses. So yeah, thank you for coming to my session. I appreciate you taking the time. All of my info, if you wish to come find me online, is on this slide. And yeah, feel free to hit me with any of your own questions, or any questions my questions have maybe made you think of.